I'm going to be critical of GB News. GB News covered this story obsessively, as if it was some huge story.
It's all his fault.
And it was never a huge story. It was one person who had increasingly been heading in a different direction from us.
Your chairman made it a big story by calling in the police.
Well, he did do that.
Do you think that was a good idea? Nigel Farage, I've got to challenge you.
I'll pass on that.
There we are.
I'll pass on that. When you're someone at the front line doing stuff, you do 100 things. You might get one wrong. You get these small, very insignificant people who
say what you think, Nigel.
Who think they're more important than they are. They're frankly nothings.
Reform UK's historic win, reshaping British politics, hopefully forever, and smashing the Uni Party has brought out the Jekyll and Hyde somewhat in Nigel Farage. I mean, it's hard to disagree with these words from him in the Daily Telegraph. Nothing will ever be the same again. Two-party politics at both local and national level is over. The system that dominated in this country for a century died on Thursday. He wrote, "It will never return." Please God, I really hope he's right. I genuinely do. I also love his threat to the Home Secretary and the Energy Secretary. He told them, Yvette and Ed's seats are high up on our target list. I want to say to them, we are coming for your seats next. Love that. Absolutely love that. And look at this map of Reform UK's support. Yep, unite the right with this power base to take on the true enemies on the left. I am all for it. Indeed, I even love this display of patriotism from Reform UK's chairman, Zia Yusuf, today. Not a fan of mine, but I love this. He wrote, Reform-controlled English councils will move at speed to resolve that the only flags permitted to be flown on or in its buildings will be the Union Jack and the St. George's flag. No other flags will be permitted to be flown on its flagpoles, balconies, reception desks, or council chamber wards. I think that's so brilliant, right? Because today, VE Day, such an important day being celebrated on this bank holiday, I see lots of Ukrainian flags on official government buildings. What is that about? And I especially loved Farage's honest takedown of this MSM reporter.
You spoke then about 750 young men.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Mr.
a small
Farage
fraction of the people living in this constituency. Can you really scapegoat them for the problems that people who fit?
Do you live in their streets?
I don't.
No, funny that, isn't it? If you live in a street and 10 or 15 young men from completely different cultures move into one of those houses and you're getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go and work on a building site or whatever it is, would you be happy about that? I tell you what, people aren't.
About what living beside people. I mean,
why should I pay my taxes for people who illegally come into Britain, get free health care, immediate GP appointments, free dental appointments, spending money, and full bed and breakfast paid for? There is a sense here that something wrong and unfair is going on.
And do you not think you're just trying to create divisions within a community?
No, the divisions are being created by weak British governments, allowing people willy-nilly from all over the world, undocumented young males of fighting age, to come into Britain in unprecedented numbers.
Yep, I love that. Honestly, he's so good in those moments. And with these sorts of memes, which I can show you now, they're not laughing now, are they? Oh, and there's the Observer front page. He was celebrating this as well from the left-wing Observer. Maybe Katie Hopkins was right that some of the ego-driven coverage might be a little bit hard to stomach.
So we're going to have to endure, and it's going to be a bit gross. So have your sit bags at the ready. We're going to endure the Nigel gloat, and it's going to be big. There's going to be ha 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 pints, the ah ha ha, the smiling outrageously at everything. There's going to be multiple cigarette ah ha ha dart moments. There's going to be the Richard Tice cuddle-a-thon. We're going to have Zia Yusuf's face all over the place, which all of us could do without. Just let them have their moment, look away, have the odd gag reflex. It's perfectly enticing.
But to be honest, I was all okay with the direction. I loved everything that was going on. I love this. So funny. Until I received an email this afternoon from my amazing Outspoken founding member, Jane. And this email, let me read it to you. She said, Dan, watch GB News at about 1:15. I know Bev Turner is your friend, but she set up the most sycophantic question and opportunity for Nigel to spout terrible stuff about Rupert and Ben. I hope Reform and Nigel get their comeuppance to dismiss Rupert as just X and no need for Tommy Robinson supporters. I hope it comes back to bite him on the bum. I'll be resigning from Reform and joining Ben, and I presume Rupert if there's still backing from Elon or other entrepreneurs. This is 4 years for Rupert and Ben to show up, Nigel. Bev blamed Andrew Pearce for the fuss, but quite rightly, he pushed back against Nigel and pointed out reporting to the police inflamed it. Nigel criticised GB News for its coverage. He's not criticising them now. Pride comes before a fall. There will be tumbles and falls, I predict, not plain sailing for 4 years. So that was the email I got. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is going on? I have to go and watch this. I do know that Ben Habib had written this critical column in the Daily Telegraph over the weekend, which maybe wasn't the best timing. So I did check it out, and it was very interesting and I think really disappointing, because Nigel used this moment on GB News to launch the biggest attack yet on Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib and Tommy Robinson, and his own employer GB News for covering other parts of the right. He also refused to defend Zia Yusuf as chairman for reporting Rupert Lowe to the police, something I reported before the election, which prompted Yusuf to call me a liar. So I want you to watch this now for yourself.
Just a few weeks ago, Nigel, with all of the furore around Rupert Lowe, people were saying, this is it, this is going to be, this isn't just a dent in the Reform Party, this is going to destroy the Reform Party. And over the weekend, people were saying, Rupert who? Yeah. It doesn't appear to have made any sort of impact, despite the best efforts of Andrew Pearce with his journalistic expertise.
Even though I work here, I'm going to be critical of GB News. GB News covered this story obsessively, as if it was some huge story.
It's all his fault.
And it was never a huge story. It was one person who had increasingly been heading in a different direction from us.
Your chairman made it a big story by calling in the police.
Well, he did do that.
Do you think that was a good idea? Nigel Farage, I'm going to challenge you.
I'll pass on that.
There we are.
I'll pass on that.
It was a bizarre decision for Zia Yusuf to call in the police.
But you know, it was only ever going to be one person. And the upshot of this, what it really tells you is that X is not the real world.
Yeah. Correct. You know, Twitter as it was now.
Twitter as it was is not the real world. So, yeah, you know, when you get problems in life, the best thing is to confront them.
Would you have him back now in the party, Rupert Lowe, after all of this? Ben Habib, is there a way back for Ben?
Over my dead body.
Well, he wrote a piece saying you didn't deserve your victory. Did you see it?
I mean, I'm sorry, you get these small, very insignificant people who
say what you think, Nigel.
Who think they're more important than they are. They're frankly nothings. There you are.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, I don't mind people sounding off. I don't mind people disagreeing with me. I never have done. As long as there's some fundamental underlying loyalty. And that's the one thing I demand.
Yeah. You just...
Small, very insignificant people that are frankly nothings. Now, I think that's totally the wrong language for people like me who want Reform to do well. But as a true Conservative party on the right, where big figures are welcome. Then it actually got worse. Because Nigel used the term alt-right. And you've got to be really careful with this. Because the alt-right term was also used by the Daily Telegraph last week to describe me and Outspoken. Now, I could sue them for that. Because being alt-right means to be a white nationalist. So that is a despicable slur to throw at anyone. It's also factually inaccurate if you're using that slur to describe, for example, Ben Habib, a Pakistani man. Watch this.
Were you confident, Nigel, all the time throughout that process that it was going to go that way?
Of course. Well, I was confident that Rupert Lowe and the alt-right Tommy Robinson supporters on X, you know, weren't much of a benefit to us. I was confident about that. I was confident it was the right thing to do. You know, I knew it would dent us in the short term, but no more than dent us. But, you know, I mean, look at the image of the party now. You know, we now have two very prominent women in the party. We have...
So Andrea Jenkins is the mayor of Lincolnshire.
Andrea Jenkins and Sarah Pochin. So we have two prominent women now amongst the sort of top half a dozen team in the party. We have a chairman who's a very brilliant man, Zia Yusuf.
Despite calling in the police.
Do you know what? When you do as much as... It's all well and it's easy for journalists. Just sit at the back.
You wouldn't have done it. You wouldn't have done it.
All you lot do. All you lot do is chuck bricks.
You wouldn't have done it.
When you're someone at the front line doing stuff, you do 100 things. You might get one wrong. You know. So we've got and who happens to be a member of the ethnic minorities. Not that that's why he's there. I think the whole look at reform is very, very different. Yeah. Very, very different. So, no, did we do the right thing over Rupert Lowe? You bet.
Okay, so lots to pick up on there. Firstly, I don't think Reform UK should play the identity politics game. You're the one that wants to get rid of all DEI officers. I completely support that. So just go for the right candidates. It doesn't matter if they're a woman. It doesn't matter if they're an ethnic minority. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim. Just go for the right candidates. Don't play that game. That's the first thing I would say. I also think you're really wrong to use that term, Nigel, and I think it will backfire on you. Being alt-right means to be a white nationalist. That is a disgusting thing to say. So, Nigel, are you saying, serious question, are you saying at the last election, the last general election, which was less than a year ago, you had a white nationalist who was actually half Pakistani as the deputy leader of your party? You had a white nationalist standing to be an MP at Great Yarmouth. That's nuts, if you actually believe that. And it also plays into the hands of the MSM, and I will show you why in just one moment. It's also very telling to me there, of course, that is Nigel Farage admitting that Zia Yusuf got it wrong to report Rupert Lowe to the police. I think Zia Yusuf should apologise to me for saying that I was lying, because that is all I reported before the election, that Nigel Farage had said that Zia Yusuf got it wrong, that he wasn't happy with the fact that he had reported Rupert Lowe to the police, and that he was intending to smoothly exit Zia Yusuf out of the job at some point in the next few months. But what we've got now is a mainstream media openly campaigning against Reform UK. And what are they going to do? They are going to use the racist label, just like Andrew Marr did on the despicable LBC over the weekend. Watch this.
Some modes, Nigel Farage talks about and says he is a classical liberal. You know, reform as in the Reform Club, it's an old-fashioned liberal word, and he says, you know, he's in favour of limited government and maximum freedom and all those things the old liberals used to be in favour of. At other times they sound Thatcherite, at other times they sound very almost like old Labour, pro-worker, pro-nationalisation, pro-reindustrialisation, and of course at other times some of them can sound pretty borderline racist.
Borderline racist. I mean, how dare he? How dare he? That is despicable. It is disgusting. It shows you where the left is going to go. And so this is my plea to Nigel. It's a genuine plea. This is what they're doing to you. So don't call your supporters alt-right. Don't call people white nationalists when you know they're not. Come on. Don't play their games. This matters. It really matters. And all of this also doesn't help prove that Reform UK is more than a Farage cult. A line the new Tory Cambridgeshire Mayor, Paul Bristow, is pushing.
Will they lose the next election to you, or do you think Reform UK will be the government of the next government of this country?
I don't think people tend to vote for protest parties at a general election.
It's not a protest party anymore. It's a party of executive power, is it not? You've got, you know, they've won 488, I think was the latest number of councils. That's more than a protest vote.
Peters, who's on their front bench? Who's going to be Home Secretary? Who would be Foreign Secretary? Who would be Defence Secretary? Who are these people? You know, look, end of the day, you know, it's a one-man cult of personality in Nigel Farage. And what do we do when people join cults? We all be...
What's interesting to me too, Boris Johnson has also seen the Rupert Lowe story as a potential weakness for Reform UK. This was from his column in the Daily Mail over the weekend. He said, I don't think the public will hand power to the newish third party, the one that was on Zero when I was PM. What was it again? They kept changing their name, refund, relaunch, regurgitate. I mean, cheap shot, but whatever. History teaches us that such ventures, no matter how temporarily exciting, do not last long in UK politics. They already seem to be squabbling among themselves, even though they have only a tiny handful in Parliament. I felt rather sorry for that chap Rupert Lowe, who ended up with an ice pick in his bonds for offending the leadership. Now, when it comes to the choice in 2029, the electorate will know that there is only one party that will not just be willing, but actually able to fix legal immigration by leaving the ECHR and bringing back the Rwanda skip. I mean, clearly that's ludicrous. Given what you did. But you see, it's a point of vulnerability, according to the Tories. And actually, even some Tories who are supportive of Reform UK want unity on the right. Check this out from Michael Fabricant. I actually really like this. He said, Reform has performed brilliantly. The general election is theirs to lose. So no more fallouts with colleagues are failing. They must prove themselves as administrators now and have local government control and must develop broad and sensible policies for national government. And look, the great thing is for Reform UK is that the left remains far more divided than the right. Do you know, the Labour lunatics are actually arguing that Slippery Starmer needs to become even more extreme, even more socialist to win, which is a hilarious prospect, but one that has been pushed over the weekend by the ex-Transport Secretary Louise Haigh and Diane Abbott. Watch. But first, people like Andrew Huberman, Rhonda Patrick, and even Joe Rogan have talked about a compound called epicatechin found in dark chocolate and green tea. Now, this is shown to improve blood flow, delivering more oxygen to muscles and the brain. Studies show that it reduces stress and fatigue while improving mood and enhancing muscle growth, strength, and recovery. One study found it boosted muscle growth factors by nearly 50% in just 1 week. But don't reach for the chocolate bars, okay? Not the chocolate bars, because processing actually destroys these compounds and you'd need an impossible amount to get results. So that's why Verso created Morning Being, a rich, chocolatey morning brew packed with epicatechin, cocoa polyphenols, antioxidants, and electrolytes to fuel energy, performance, focus, and longevity. Unlike coffee or other coffee alternatives, it supports muscle recovery, cardiovascular health, and cognitive function, all without caffeine crashes. Cocoa powders, drinks, and products are commonly contaminated with high levels of toxic heavy metals, but Verso conducts third-party testing on every batch to ensure they have pure, high-quality cocoa, prioritizing safety and high flavanol content. Now, I started taking Morning Bean to replace my morning energy drink. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. But actually, it's perfect to replace your coffee or even a second cup in the morning. And as a result, I feel more focused and energized. I also like how I get my daily dose of superfoods from it. So if you're looking to improve your health with something that's actually backed by research, click on the link in the description box below, or you can head on over to morning.ver.so/outspoken. Let me just repeat the address, the word morning.ver.so/outspoken. Use the code outspoken to get 15% off your first order. But now, back to the show.
Since we won the general election last year, we've done a series of actions which are the most painful for some of the most marginalised and poor communities. So, for instance, we have not lifted the two-child benefit on child tax allowance, which is the single biggest thing we could have done to deal with child poverty. We have cut the winter fuel tax allowance, and now we're cutting benefits on the disabled. I think it's very alarming, the direction we've taken. I hope that we will learn the lesson from what has happened last night and today, but if we don't, we are going to find ourselves in a very politically vulnerable position. And these aren't just knee-jerk votes, these are votes that may not come back.
Now, the biggest problem Slippery Starmer has is that he promised us this.
Can now change the country for the better. And what do? You make promises you can't keep and don't really intend to keep, and you don't do the change that's needed in the country. I feel very strongly, if you're not going to deliver, if you're not going to keep your promises, don't bullshit.
When we all know, Prime Minister, that it is you delivering bullshit and lies on a daily basis. So Nigel, of course, I believe he will most likely be Prime Minister in 2029. I first predicted that before the election last year. I just wish he wouldn't keep alienating large swaths of his base. Now, let me bring in today's superstar panel. So brilliant to have them both back. The SDP's new spokesperson for foreign affairs, defence and security, but of course a former leader of UKIP and so much more, Henry Bolton, and Alex Phillips, former spokeswoman at UKIP, former Brexit Party MEP, launch presenter on GB News, now on Substack. That's what she said. Okay, Alex. So, you know we disagree on this point, but come on, please tell me, if you were advising Nigel today, you would say, don't go on GB News and call your former deputy leader, who is half Pakistani, alt-right. Like, come on. That's like a low blow.
Yeah, do you know, until you gave me a definition of alt-right, I didn't really know that alt-right meant a white nationalist. I just thought it meant the alternative on the right wing. Quite frankly, and I didn't know that. I don't know what the parameters of the definition are. But when it comes to Ben, look, I know Ben super well. I'm not particularly impressed with the way Ben has been behaving. There seems to be a big cup of bitterness that he wants to share around. Ben, it's a shame because Ben is such a brilliant performer. Ben's politics are in the right place. He's a great communicator. But, you know, Ben isn't necessarily a team player. And I think that has been shown up. If Ben had won his seat in the general election, I think he'd be playing a very different tune. What I would say is, you know, yes, journalists are going to cajole you. They're going to encourage you. They're going to try and exaggerate any divisions or any personal fallings out. And I think the best thing to do is just offer sort of platitudes rather than look prickly about it. But, you know, I don't really think that there's too much harm that's been done by this. I would rather Ben had stayed inside the tent doing the proverbial outwards than vice versa. And I think Nigel probably feels the same way.
What about you, Henry Bolton? Where do you stand on this? Because, of course, you were the leader of UKIP, so you've also worked very closely with Nigel.
I think it was unwise, but I think the problem here actually isn't specifically Ben or Rupert or Nigel. What happens when you throw a team together as rapidly as Reform have done? And bear in mind that although the heritage of the Reform Party does go back to UKIP, then through the Brexit Party, which was then renamed as Reform, and some sort of changes at the top of the table all through the process. But essentially, Reform has amazingly sort of grown so fast that actually, well, when you grow that fast, you sacrifice your ability to ensure that you've got a tight team. You are always going to have, as I had when I inherited the leadership of UKIP, you have a whole bunch of cats that don't want to be herded. And in politics, you have people with strong opinions, strong characters, and strong resolve. And if you don't ensure at the beginning that they're all signed up to a common sort of vision and direction, then you are inevitably going to have these sort of problems. And Reform still, and virtually no political party in Britain has done this, but Reform as well still has not offered the nation a vision of where it wants to go. And as long as it doesn't do that, it is going to it's going to bring a whole bunch of people. It's not Nigel's fault, but it's going to bring a whole bunch of people together sort of under the Nigel cult. You know, there are the Reform councillors now here down in Kent who I've spoken to two of them, and they were both effectively saying, "Oh, I met Nigel down the Dog and Duck last night," but they've got no clue as to where Nigel wants to go. They've got no clue as to Reform policies. They simply want to stop immigration, and that's why they've stood. So there is no policy or vision sort of coherence in Reform at the moment. And then I think final point on this is that Nigel, I get on great with Nigel on a certain level. But when you talk about specific opinions, if you differ, then he can be very, very dismissive. And for strong-willed characters who have great experience to offer, I don't think that's the right form of management or leadership. I think you need to bring them into the tent, not ignore them if you don't like what they say, which he does. And I think when that happens, you need to make effort to bring them in if you can't do that, then you need to have a serious conversation with them rather than let the whole thing fester. Which is what
Alex, how because you obviously know Nigel incredibly well, Alex. You've worked with him for years, never fallen out with him on any level, although I should say I haven't either. How do you respond to this Tory claim, but actually Henry's saying it too, that maybe Reform UK is the cult of Nigel, and is that a bit risky for a political party to be built around one man?
Is it risky? Well, I suppose you'd have to ask yourself the question, if something happened to Nigel, what then would Reform continue? And I think at this stage, there isn't a sort of, obvious success or obvious successors. But that is simply down to the fact that in Nigel, there is a once in a lifetime, once in a generation leader. The other political parties would tear off their limbs to have such a leader. The problem the Conservatives are facing is they have a leader in Kemi Badenoch that hasn't lit up the room, that hasn't sort of brought inspirational droves of followers back to the cause. Same, really, frankly, with our Prime Minister. I mean, that's our ambassador on the world stage. And so what we have in Nigel is someone who, like I said, just doesn't come around very often. And so in the sort of shadow, the long shadow that the sort of presence of Nigel casts, you do sort of think, well, who is waiting in the wings? But it does, Henry makes a really salient point. Well done, Henry, can I just say, for pointing out that when you're a new party and you're developing and you're still sort of plastic and deciding where you're going to put your boundaries and your parameters and how the look and feel of it's going to be, and you're like cobbling together a team, that it's a far weaker structure when there are disagreements and falling outs than if you're a big legacy entity, almost an industry, like the Conservative Party is. We've seen with the Conservative Party, Boris Johnson, it's interesting, he writes the article about, Rupert Lowe with the ice pick in his bonce. Well, he's a former Prime Minister who firmly had an ice pick placed in his bonce. So, in politics, this is often how it can go. It's a brutal cutthroat sport. It's very often all about clashing egos. And Reform's going to have to manage those things as it develops and as it evolves. But the point is this, politically, Reform has captured the mood of a nation. And yes, Henry's right, there isn't a fully built out manifesto. There isn't all the sort of, bits of ideology put in place, that it's a secured entity, that we all know what all the policies are. But it's also true, as Henry says, that no other political party has that in place yet either. But when you're a small party and you're seeing the sort of huge successes that Reform is now witnessing, the demand for that to happen and happen quickly is going to be greater. And so we've suddenly seen that this is an entity, a movement that has captured the mood of the nation. I don't think it's just a protest vote. I think there are people across the nation, from Wales to Scotland to Northern Ireland to Great Grimsby to Clacton, that are all saying, we think we found a new political home and we want a great amount of change. And so they're saying, yes, good, I finally want to go out and vote. I'm inspired. But now what has to happen is that building out. What has to happen is the construction of an entity that looks like it can take government. And I have no doubt that people are working extremely hard behind the scenes to do that at Reform. But the scale of the challenge, when you haven't been around for the best part of 100 years, you haven't had branches around the country, you don't have think tanks that have been long established serving you on a silver platter what your policies might be, fully researched, fully costed. The momentousness of what Reform now have to do is unlike any other political party, frankly, in my lifetime, possibly in a century. Do I think Reform can do it? Yes, I do. Do I think it's needed? Yes, it is. But let's not shy away from the scale of the challenge, but it is the circumstance that necessitates that someone new takes over, looks at those things with completely fresh eyes. It's now upon the party to deliver.
Dan, if I may.
Yes, please.
I'm just going to, because I want, good God, I want this country to succeed, and I want it to finally have a government, and we're going to be waiting till 2029 for it to happen. I don't think there's any chance of it happening before that. We're going to have a government in 2029, and God, let it be a government that can govern. But I fear that unless, if that government is formed by Reform, and Reform has not placed a a vision in front of the British people and said, this is where we are going. And there's political risk in that, because a lot of people who are supporting reform won't like it, because, you know, there are a whole bunch of cats in any political party that you've got to herd. That's part of the job of the leader. And, you know, some people won't like that vision, which is part of the reason why Nigel has never presented such a thing. It's about intent, it's about goals, it's about objectives for Nigel, which is get out of the European Union.
But it does seem actually quite clear to me at the moment, which is that we don't want to present ourselves as a party to the right. We don't want to present ourselves as a party of Rupert Lowe's. We want to present ourselves as a party of the centre and encompassing the left, which is where I think that there will be problems, certainly with uniting the right. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.